In the 6th chapter of the book of Genesis, the Bible presents us with a brief and terrifying snapshot of a world on the brink of annihilation. It speaks of a time when the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and through their unholy union, a monstrous offspring known as the Nephilim were born, filling the earth with such violence and corruption that God was forced to intervene with a global flood. For most, the story ends there, a strange and unsettling prelude to the epic of Noah's Ark. But the Bible's concise account is merely the headline. Another, far more detailed and ancient text claims to tell the full story. It gives a name to these sons of God, a title for their sacred duty, and a horrifying list of the forbidden secrets they unleashed upon our world. They were known as the Watchers. The story of the Watchers is the story of the greatest dereliction of duty in cosmic history. These were not just any angels. The term Watcher, found in the book of Daniel and expanded upon in the ancient Book of Enoch, refers to a specific, high-ranking order of celestial beings. Their sacred task was to watch over humanity, to oversee the fledgling world from a distance, and to ensure the created order remained in balance. They were the divine guardians, the celestial overseers of earth. But they were given one absolute command: to watch, but never to interfere. They were to be shepherds from afar, not to descend and dwell among the flock. But in the days of a man named Jared, the father of Enoch, a conspiracy was born. A group of these divine guardians, consumed by lust for human women, decided to abandon their holy post and commit the ultimate transgression. The ancient Book of Enoch, a text held in high regard during the time of Jesus and even quoted by the New Testament apostles, chronicles this catastrophic event in chilling detail. It tells us that a group of 200 watchers under the leadership of a powerful angel named Shemihaza gathered together on the summit of Mount Hermon, a real mountain on the border of modern-day Lebanon and Syria. There, on that peak, they swore a terrible oath, binding one another with curses to a single horrifying purpose. They would descend from the heavens together, take human wives for themselves, and father a new race of beings. This was not a moment of weakness or a slip-up by a few rogue angels. This was a premeditated, organized, and mutinous conspiracy against the authority of God and the sanctity of His creation. It was a willful abandonment of heaven. The sin of the Watchers was twofold. The first, and most obvious, was the defilement of God's created order. By leaving their spiritual domain and procreating with human women, they breached a fundamental, holy boundary between the celestial and the terrestrial. This act was a grotesque twisting of God's gift of love and union, resulting in the birth of a monstrous hybrid offspring, the Nephilim. We have discussed these giants before, but their story is inseparable from the sins of their fathers. The Book of Enoch describes them as being of immense stature, some 3,000 cubits tall, with an appetite to match. Their existence threw the natural world into chaos as they consumed everything in their path, eventually turning on animals, humanity, and even each other in a cannibalistic rage. The earth itself began to cry out under the weight of their violence. But it is the second sin of the Watchers that truly reveals the diabolical nature of their rebellion. They did not just bring their lust to earth, they brought with them the forbidden knowledge of heaven. They became corrupt teachers, systematically downloading celestial secrets into the minds of a primitive human race that was not ready for them. Each of the leaders of the Watchers taught a specific, corrupting art. This act was a deliberate and malicious effort to accelerate human sin, to unravel society from the inside out, and to pollute the very soul of mankind. They didn't just break the rules, they taught humanity how to break every rule in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. This unleashing of forbidden knowledge is the great forgotten sin that truly forced God's hand to bring the flood. At the forefront of this corrupting enterprise was a watcher named Azazel, a figure so sinister that some traditions equate him with Satan himself. The Book of Enoch states that Azazel taught men the secrets of war and violence. He showed them how to mine the earth and craft metals into swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. In a world that may have only known primitive tools, he introduced the technology of advanced weaponry, single-handedly inventing the art of organized warfare and bloodshed. The violence that filled the earth was not a natural human progression. It was a direct result of this demonic tutelage. But Azazel's corruption was not limited to men. He was also credited with teaching women what the text calls the deceptive arts. Azazel taught women the secrets of making bracelets and ornaments, the art of using precious stones, and most specifically, the practice of beautifying the eyelids with kohl. This was not a simple condemnation of jewelry or makeup. In its context, it was the introduction of vanity, seduction, and the use of external appearance for manipulation and pride. In a simple society, he introduced the complexities of materialism, vanity, and using beauty as a weapon or a commodity. He corrupted social structures by creating artificial hierarchies based on appearance and wealth, fueling envy, lust, and pride. Azazel, through the twin pillars of warfare and vanity, single-handedly laid the foundation for a society built on violence and superficiality. The other leaders of the Watchers brought their own unique poisons to the world. Shemihaza, their chief, taught the arts of sorcery and the cutting of roots, which refers to pharmacology used for magical incantations and potions. This was the birth of black magic, the human attempt to command and manipulate spiritual forces outside of the will of God. Another watcher, Barakiel, taught astrology, the practice of divining the future and seeking guidance from the stars. Kokabel taught the knowledge of the constellations, not for navigation or science, but for divination. Sariel taught the course of the moon, likely for the timing of magical rituals. These angels took the perfect ordered science of God's cosmos and twisted it into the occult. They taught humanity to seek wisdom from the creation rather than the creator, a fundamental act of idolatry. Imagine the world that resulted from this terrible education. It was a world armed with advanced weapons and filled with a new lust for violence and conquest. It was a society obsessed with vanity, materialism, and seduction, and it was a spiritual landscape suddenly teeming with sorcerers, astrologers, and witches, all trafficking with dark powers and demonic entities. The very fabric of human civilization was being intentionally unraveled by these celestial traitors. They had been sent to watch over humanity, and instead they chose to corrupt and destroy it. This was the world that Enoch was born into, and this was the world that Noah would be called to survive. The evil was not just human, it was systematic, intelligent, and supernaturally orchestrated. The physical manifestation of this spiritual corruption was the Nephilim. As these watchers continued their unions with human women, their children grew to become a terror on the earth. The Book of Enoch gives a chilling account of their reign. It says, and they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. This is the stuff of nightmares, a race of demigods with the power of angels and the appetites of monsters, literally preying upon the human race. They were the apex predators, and humanity was their cattle. This account explains the cryptic biblical phrase that the earth was filled with violence. It was a world under the brutal oppression of a monstrous, cannibalistic race. As the Nephilim continued their rampage, sinning against birds, beasts, and fish, and eventually devouring one another's flesh and drinking blood, the text says that the earth personified cried out against the lawless ones. The souls of the dead humans devoured and destroyed cried out to heaven, their voices reaching the gates of the celestial sanctuary. The book says that the holy archangels, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, looked down from heaven and saw the immense bloodshed and lawlessness that covered the world. They saw the work of the Watchers and their monstrous offspring and knew that divine intervention was the only solution. They brought the case of humanity before the throne of the Most High, reporting the cosmic treason and the suffering it had caused. The response from the throne of God was one of swift and terrible judgment. God declared that the world must be cleansed by a great flood to wash away the corruption and the monstrous beings that defiled it. But first, he would deal with the architects of this chaos, the Watchers themselves. God dispatched his archangels with specific terrifying missions. He sent Uriel to warn Noah, the son of Lamech, of the coming deluge, and to instruct him on how to escape with his family, preserving the pure seed of humanity. God's judgment is always tempered with a plan of salvation for the righteous. Then God gave his command to the archangel Raphael concerning Azazel, the one who had taught warfare and vanity. He said, "Bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the desert, which is in Dudael, and cast him therein, and place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, and let him dwell there forever, and cover his face that he may not see light." Azazel, who had sought glory and light, was condemned to a prison of eternal, absolute darkness and isolation, a punishment perfectly fitted to his crimes. He was to be bound until the great day of judgment, when he would be cast into the fire. To the archangel Gabriel, God gave a different command. He was to be the instrument of civil war among the Nephilim. God told him, "Proceed against the bastards and the reprobates, and against the children of fornication, and destroy the children of the Watchers from amongst men. Send them one against the other, that they may destroy each other in battle." Before the flood would wipe them from the earth, the giants were incited to turn their immense violence upon themselves. God used their own corrupted nature as the tool of their initial destruction, a horrifying spectacle of self-immolation for their angelic fathers to witness from their prisons. Finally, God commanded Michael, the commander of the heavenly host, to deal with Shemihaza and the rest of his co-conspirators. He said, "Go bind Shemihaza and his associates, who have united themselves with women, so as to have defiled themselves with them in all their uncleanness. Bind them fast for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, till the day of their judgment and of their consummation." This judgment is profoundly significant. They were not to be destroyed immediately, but imprisoned within the earth itself, bound in darkness to await their final sentence at the end of days. This act of binding is the very story that the apostles, Peter and Jude reference in their New Testament epistles, confirming that this ancient tradition was understood to be the true fate of the angels who sinned. The New Testament confirms this fate with chilling clarity. 2 Peter chapter 2 states, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment." Jude verse 6 echoes this perfectly. "And the angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper dwelling place, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day." The punishment for the watchers was imprisonment. They abandoned their post in heaven, and in return, they were confined to a prison deep within the earth. A story that served as a terrifying warning to both human and angelic beings about the consequences of cosmic treason. But what of their children, the Nephilim? While their physical bodies were destroyed in the flood, the Enochian tradition offers a terrifying explanation for their spiritual aftermath. Because the Nephilim were a hybrid of a spiritual father and a mortal mother, their spirits were also a hybrid. When they died, their spirits could not pass into the heavenly realm, as they were tainted with mortal flesh and unholy in their origin. Nor could they properly rest in Sheol, the place of the human dead, as they were not fully human. Cursed to be caught between realms, their disembodied spirits were destined to roam the earth. The Book of Enoch explicitly states, "The spirits of the giants who shall be concealed shall not rise against the sons of men and against the women, because they have proceeded from them." It then clarifies that these spirits will corrupt, fall, be excited, and fall upon the earth and cause sorrow. This ancient tradition provides a powerful and coherent origin story for the beings we now know as demons. It explains their nature as disembodied spirits who long to inhabit physical bodies. It explains their inherent hatred for humanity, the race from which they were born but can never truly join. And it explains their relentless drive to continue the work of their fathers, to corrupt, deceive, torment, and destroy mankind. The sin of the Watchers did not end when they were imprisoned. It left behind a permanent spiritual malignancy on the earth, an army of enraged and sorrowful spirits who would continue to wage war against humanity until the final judgment. The unleashing of this forbidden knowledge by the Watchers created a world so steeped in violence and spiritual pollution that a global flood was God's only recourse to cleanse it. The knowledge itself, however, was never fully erased. The echoes of the Watchers' teachings have reverberated throughout human history. The desire for power through violence and advanced weaponry, the obsession with materialism and vanity, the seductive lure of the occult, and seeking power from spiritual sources other than God. These are not modern problems. These are the ancient corruptions introduced by the fallen guardians, and they are more prevalent and powerful in our world today than ever before. So, the antidote to the forbidden knowledge of the Watchers is the divine wisdom that comes from God. The book of Proverbs personifies this true wisdom as a woman crying out in the streets, offering life and understanding. James chapter 3 in the New Testament makes a sharp distinction between two kinds of wisdom. There is a wisdom that is earthly, unspiritual, demonic, which leads to bitter jealousy, selfish ambition, and disorder. This is the wisdom of the Watchers. But, James says, the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits. This is the wisdom that God offers, a wisdom that leads not to destruction, but to righteousness and peace. Ultimately, the story of the Watchers and the chaos they unleash serves to magnify the glory and necessity of Jesus Christ. The New Testament says in 1 John 3:8, "The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil." The works of the devil are not just minor sins. They are the entire corrupting systems of violence, pride, and occultism that were systematically introduced into the world by the Watchers. Jesus came as a warrior, a liberator, to defeat these ancient powers and to reclaim a world that was under their influence. His victory on the cross was not just over human sin. It was a decisive triumph over the cosmic powers of darkness, the principalities and authorities that have been at war with God since the beginning. The story of the Watchers is a dark and sobering chapter in the history of the cosmos. It is a cautionary tale of duty abandoned, boundaries violated, and knowledge corrupted. It warns us against the timeless temptation to seek power, beauty, or wisdom from sources outside of God's will. It reminds us that there is a real, intelligent, and ancient spiritual enemy who is hostile to our very existence, but it also serves to make the gospel shine that much more brightly. It shows us the true depth of the darkness that Christ came to conquer, and it assures us that His light is infinitely more powerful. The guardians may have fallen, but the King has triumphed, and in Him we find our ultimate protection and our truest wisdom.